today's presentation. Where are we at?
So thank you. What I've prepared is just a brief update on what we've been up to the elementary school with regard to math and doing the groundwork so that we can develop a goal. So in the strategic plan, I just listed on the right-hand side the wording that exists in there now, just that a specific goal be established by the end of this year. And we are working toward full implementation of AIMSWeb in math, but also we're working on implementation in ELA as well. And then, just an ongoing analysis of trend data. So just a reminder, we talked about this a little bit before. I put up a description of what AIMSWeb is, and it's actually AIMSWeb Plus now. We're in our second year really of using AIMSWeb, but AIMSWeb Plus is the new and improved version of AIMSWeb. Last year it was called AIMSWeb 2.0. And there are a couple things just to remember about AIMSWeb. It's a universal screener, and we use it for school-wide benchmarking, but also individual goal setting and progress monitoring. And it is very brief measures that we use for all of our kids K-5 that gives us somewhat of a blood pressure reading on academic achievement. So the specific goal that we've set out to establish by the end of this school year, I included somewhat of a checklist here. Some of those things could really be checked at this point, but that's just because they're ongoing. And we are in the process of obtaining K-5 benchmark data for fall, winter, and spring. As a matter of fact, tomorrow starts the winter benchmarking process. So if this presentation was a week from today, I'd have another data point to share with you school-wide. But I can still share with you our process, and that's my goal tonight. We have enough data that, from our fall benchmarking to have just a snapshot of how our kids are performing compared to same-aged peers nationally. And that's the normative data that we're using to compare, our scores with. Sorry, I don't mean to have my back turned. It's kind of a view here. But what we want to do is, and what we need to do, is with our winter and our spring benchmark data that we've collected, or that we will have collected, we'll be able to then, identify a trend and even drill down into some more specific goal areas. What I'd like to do is, there's a couple of links here, and if you can click on the first one, the K-1 benchmark distribution report. I'm including this because it's a good, just a representation of the data that we see, and I thought this was important for you. Not that I want to get into the interpretation of the data, it's way too early for that, but that you can see the kind of data that we get and what we might be able to do with it, and I'll share with you a little bit more about it. This right here represents the national percentile ranking. So the top bar here is the, we'll just consider it above and well above average. This green section here is average performance, and this section down here, sort of a yellowish, is below and well below average. And here are Geneseo kindergarten students, here are Geneseo first grade students in what's called early numeracy battery. So early numeracy, oral counting, identifying numbers, quantity discrimination, so knowing that this quantity is larger or smaller, greater than or less than this number. These are the measures, but a couple of things I want to point out. First of all, this is a brand new assessment and format for our kids and for our teachers. And so this data alone, I do not think is a fair representation of the comparison between their national same-age peers, simply because it's brand new in format and just overall the type of assessment we're asking them to perform on. And second really is that this is one moment in time, just the fall 2016. After tomorrow and the spring benchmarking time period, I'll be excited to share with you our findings then, because we'll have another couple of sets of data to report on. But again, this was just to show you what the data looks like, not to talk about the comparison. And then if you can just scroll down. Yeah, that's okay. This again, it just gives us sort of a little bit more of a specific breakdown of how our students fall into each of these categories. This is a very broad view. This is a bit more specific. So we have literally 2 students in the kindergarten level that fall into the 90th to 99th percentile, and you can see how the rest of them break down. So the bulk of our students fall into the average, some dipping into the well below average or below average. But again, this is just one moment in time, and then the first grade set of data there too. So if you could just click out of that one, that's what our kindergarten and first grade data currently looks like.
So it'll be interesting to see if those percentages change much, in terms of the percentile ranks and our numbers of students, in each of the percentiles as we move through the different data points this year. That'll be an interesting trend to look at.
It really will, and as we gain proficiency at administering the test, it also is online. One benefit too, I guess it's just a side note, is that the format that we're taking these tests in, it's called TestNav, is the application that we use to administer the test. It's the same application that the state test, the online version of the state test, is going to be in. So in a way, our kids are getting exposed to the method of testing that they're going to encounter down the road a bit ahead of time. And then this one is it's the same type of comparison. This is grades 2 through 5, and this is a math benchmark, or the battery of math tests that make up a benchmark. So both of these sets of data are just ones that I pulled that show composite scores. So they're made up of 2 to 4 subtests that work together or combine together to create a composite score. And so grades 2 through 5, we're actually slightly above the national average percentile. So I'll tell you, this data is very realistic. And no, same thing though. Same thing. It's the first shot at administration and exposure for our kids, and so it'll be interesting to see and identify the trends as we move forward. And again, if you scroll down, you'll see the same type of breakdown for how many kids fall into what percentile ranges. So this was one way I can pull the data, or we can pull the data from AIMSWeb to use if we're looking at our entire school or entire grade levels at a time. So you can close that.
And you can do grade level and by teacher as well, right?
We can. We can break it down. We could go anywhere from school-wide to, district-wide, but in our case it's school-wide, right down to individual student, and even drill down. I included some data in coming up to share with you how we use it in addition to working toward identifying trends for grade levels or our entire school, how we can use it for individual student goal setting, intervention, and progress monitoring.
You want that one?
Yeah, then this one, you can't really see it on this, but as far as the heading, but this one was interesting to me because instead of just pulling a composite score, this one is actually math computation fluency. So how kids can look at a set of math problems and determine the operation and perform that calculation mentally and solve problems under a time constraint. So just the same type of breakdown, but I wanted to show you an example of how we can drill down and get some more specific information on a particular set of skills instead of just the composite scores. And again, if I were to pull everyone, we could have 20 or 30 slides up here to show all the different ways that we are allowed to break it down. But this is one of the reasons why I wanted to take the time this year to determine what data we are going to encounter, what we can get from this, and then what the most appropriate goal will be, based on what we have. So if you can advance, nope, I can.
Yeah.
So this is a little detour. But it's very important for you to know, I think, that what I was just saying, that we can use, our AIMSWeb data for individual analysis and intervention planning, goal setting and progress monitoring. And in a second, I'll show you a student report that comes from one of our own fifth graders. His name is Oliver Octagon. And AIMSWeb training is going to be coming to our school this month. We're actually using Title I funding to provide a day-long training for up to 30 of our staff members. And right now we're getting filled up, which is going to be great because this is kind of what we're up to right now. In addition to looking at the big picture, we're trying to provide some support to our providers so they can take the AIMSWeb tools to the next level and provide the best support possible to students they work with. So if you can click on Oliver Octagon. This is just an example of the data that we can get from a individual student level. So this right here shows, if you actually scroll down just a little bit more, right here, this is this student's benchmark score. So nationally falls into the 20th percentile. Performance level overall below average, high risk status, grade equivalent. And what we see though is that in geometry and operations and algebraic thinking, this student has a bit more strength than in these three categories here. And so if you scroll all the way down, what we also have is a breakdown of, and you can stop right there, would be perfect. So fractions, for example, this is just a breakdown. On this particular subtest, there were 2 items out of 11 items that fall under this category that the student scored points on. So our providers can look at this information and determine very specific intervention strategies to address those skill deficits. Again, I just included that portion so you can see that it can be very broad, but also very specific, as well. We're using it both ways.
I mean, the idea of AIS is that we're helping students build skills where they need it, and that we're not simply kind of reteaching everything that they've already had. Because obviously this student, isn't deficient or is less deficient, I guess, in a couple of areas, but really, shows significant need in the measurement and number and operations category.
Just for my sake, what would be the follow-up then? So you've identified it, you know there's some areas that we could concentrate. What would you do next?
So one of the things that we're doing with the AIMSWeb trainer is to, we have the ability to set goals and monitor progress toward those goals. And so what we would do is we would look at skill deficit areas. We would identify an intervention. We would apply that intervention or supply that intervention for a period of time, 6 to 18 weeks. And they would work one-on-one or in a small group with an AIS provider or a specialized teacher.
After school?
During the school day.
Okay.
Yep, and so one of the times would be possibly during, we have in our schedule called a PI time, practice, intervention, and enrichment. So after the core map instruction, there's a half-hour time built in for every classroom, every grade level following that period that they would either pull or push in and provide service. Yep, and specific focused, intervention in that area.
And because this particular student is a 5th grader, Mike, probably this is a student who has, had academic intervention services as they've come up through the elementary. But this would be a very useful tool if this were a younger student and you were just starting to enter, that type of ground where you're thinking is this student really struggling in math? Are there particular areas of math where that are more problematic? And so this tool really becomes very useful.
Yeah, and it does allow us to tend to the very specific areas and not, do more of a tutoring, support service or a blanket, additional support for classroom, instruction. It's more of a, it's a very focused,
I like it.
approach on a specific skill deficit. It allows us to set a very specific goal and talk in terms of measurement, and only measurement.
Yeah.
And so you can close out of that. And then I will advance. So what could a goal look like for 2017-18? I included our district reading goal up here, and just keeping with the same format, something that would be realistic would be something that reads, like this. 90% of all K-5 students will achieve within the average to above average range as measured by their composite math score and AIMSWeb plus benchmark assessment. And we're talking school-wide. And so I think some of the things I've shown you, my hope was, or my goal was to show you that, this is as broad as it gets. But then, in order to achieve that goal, we're looking at the kids that are, hovering just below the 25th percentile, down into the, the well below that 25th percentile, and providing, as much intense intervention as we can for them, and setting very short, specific goals for those students. So, questions?
What's the difference between AIMSWeb Plus and AIMSWeb 2.0?
Really, the program itself. 2.0, same concept, very clunky to the end user. Really
So it's
not.
user interface and.
It really is.
Okay.
What we
Navigation.
found, it's navigation. It's just ease of use,
Yep.
locating resources that we
Dashboard.
need. Yeah, all of that.
Okay.
Just the
RJ,
interface.
is all the testing computer-based, K-5?
It is.
It is.
Yep. There are certain measures that, when you get into some of the ELA probes that they have a written component to it. There's a writing one.
Yeah.
We don't use that just yet, but we're just taking small chunks.
So how about a student's work in terms of, if a student is doing the math probe, do they show computation? Do they have to show computation, or is it multiple choice format, or?
Yeah, so for the benchmarking assessment, most of it is mental math. Most of it is, determining the difference between two numbers. There are
So they
measures.
just provide the answer?
Yes.
And that's it, yeah.
Yep, but there are some for the concepts and applications part of the math probes when you get up into 4th and 5th grade, where they do have to do a little bit of calculation, and they can use, the tools that they need to use to do that.
I ask because one of the areas is, as the state is trying to move to computer-based testing, even for 3.8 testing, to have it be computer-based. One of the question marks has been around students being able to show their work or do their work on the
Yes.
screen.
One of the things too, I think is important with the AIMSWeb Plus that they've done is they've aligned it to, all of the standards that we are currently operating, from. And also, we have all new normative data. The AIMSWeb 2.0 and then the original AIMSWeb was based on, aging normative data. So the comparative data that we have, I think, is a lot more reliable.
Is that updated every year, or?
It's not. No, the gap, I think, between, and I'm guessing here, I'm not guessing, I'm going from memory, was about 5 years
Okay.
between the last
Yeah.
normative process, or the process they did to acquire the norms. All right, thank you.
Good.
One more thing.
Oh, sure.
When you showed the data from K through 5, if I was reading it correctly, it looked like even though the kindergarten and first grade, the benchmark, or our one point in time was low, it showed growth every year. And then we went above the national average, and that number seemed to grow as they've been.
The discrepancy between Geneseo
Right,
and
and
national.
then we ended up going above the national average, so it did look like a positive, even though it was one set of data.
Yeah.
They grew over the 5 years.
I-
But there was growth as far as the students having been there. Does that make sense?
Yep, and you did look at that, right? I actually liked that
So,
slide.
so that, I
It
think
was-
is, I think it was good to see that, even
Yeah.
just in, with one set of it.
Yeah, it really is, and it'll be, like I said, it will be interesting and exciting to, share with you the data that we get from our winter and our spring, benchmarking process too, especially as we gain proficiency and the kids, gain familiarity with it. I think that, we're gonna see a pretty steep slope. So, that's what we're up to.
Thanks,
My
Eric.
pleasure.
Thank you, Randy.